Aibovan, Vanakkam. I'm Bayoni Dimel. This is Boston Lanka News, bringing you news, views, and entertainment from Boston and USA. President Mahinda Rajapaksa promised to bring peace and prosperity to Sri Lanka. How Sri Lankan diaspora can contribute to find a political solution to Sri Lanka. Sumi Kailasapati, running for the city council in Ann Arbor in Michigan State. Sri Lanka's President Mahinda Rajapaksa strengthened his political dominance by winning a majority in parliamentary elections and promised to bring peace and prosperity to a nation battered by 30 years of civil war. Boston Lanka contacted prominent journalist in Sri Lanka, Malinda Senviratne, to talk about Sri Lanka after the elections. Mr. Senviratne, how do you interpret the mandate the President Rajapaksa's ruling party received at the parliamentary elections?
The result indicates that it is basically a reconfirmation, reaffirmation, or endorsement of the result of January 26th, where the president he won the presidential election with a resounding majority, and the electorate backed him and basically said we support the executive and we are supporting the legislation now. We hope that it will strengthen the hand of the president.
Mr. Senviratne, referring to the just concluded Sri Lankan parliamentary elections, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Robert Blake had said in a statement, "I think one of the noteworthy things about the recent elections was that hardline Sinhalese nationalist parties took a severe beating." Do you have any comments?
Robert Blake has absolutely no clue about Sri Lankan politics or Sri Lankan affairs. Because, see, considering the fact, what are his indicators for this, that the JVP lost? Well, the JVP lost to the UPFA, which had essentially hijacked the agenda of the JVP, of the two hardline parties, so-called, the JVP and the Jatika Helorum. The Jatika Helorum essentially wrote the manifesto for the UPFA. So, to the extent that the hardline position has triumphed overwhelmingly. What is this person talking about? I have no idea. I think he's really lost if he doesn't understand what the hardline. And why does he not talk about the fact that hardline Muslim parties were wiped out? How does he explain that the pro-LTT Tamil National Alliance, their supporters drastically declined by almost 100%, from 22 to 11 or 12? What does he say about that? Why does he not see this as some kind of decline in hardline and all across the board? Why just single out the Sinhalese?
To continue our conversation on post-conflict Sri Lanka, Boston Lanka joined with Dr. Suranjan Veeraratne in Washington, D.C. Dr. Veeraratne is an expert on conflict resolution who had done extensive studies on Sri Lanka and Indonesia. Dr. Veeraratne, in your view, what are the concrete steps the Sri Lankan government can take to integrate the Sri Lankan diaspora, including the Tamil diaspora, into the processes of reconciliation and finding a political solution for Sri Lanka, so that we may not have to go through another civil unrest in the country?
Yes, I believe it's critically important to engage the diaspora. This is a challenging task, though. The Sri Lankan diaspora is not a monolithic entity. It doesn't talk with one voice. There's the Tamil diaspora and there's the Sinhalese diaspora. And of course, there are factions within each. The government needs to engage both sets. And I think it's especially crucial to engage the Tamil diaspora, given that 80% or by a conservative estimate, almost 80% of the Sri Lankan diaspora is Tamil. So even while the conflict was going on, the Tamil diaspora channeled lots of funds back home in terms of remittances through formal and informal channels. It is true that a hefty chunk of that money went towards funding the Tigers, but some of it was channeled to fund schools, hospitals, and social economic projects in the north and east. Now that the war is over, the financial clout of the Tamil diaspora, I think, can be a very useful asset in facilitating the rebuilding of the North and East. But the government has to give them clear incentives in order to invest. Even today, a fairly significant percentage of the Tamil diaspora are supportive of an independent state and are broadly sympathetic to the LTTE cause. There's a deep sense of antipathy towards the Sri Lankan state, and I think there's an entrenched sense of exclusion and marginalization. So there's this deeply embedded mindset. So if the Sri Lankan government is serious about getting these people help, it needs to change this mindset. They have to give them observable, tangible reasons for wanting to help. I think the government has taken some good steps, initial steps. They've organized this expatriate forum. They've sponsored visits of several hundreds of members of the diaspora community, but it needs to do a lot more. Again, there needs to be a political settlement, not window dressing, not some superficial paint over the cracks job, but a meaningful, substantive settlement.
Sumi Kailasapati, a Sri Lankan living in Michigan State, declared her candidacy to contest as a Democrat for Ann Arbor City Council in the state of Michigan. Could you please share with us how your life in Sri Lanka and your experiences there shaped, formed, challenged you to take this enormous challenge of running to city council and, if elected, to serve as a council person?
Very good question, because if you look at my website too, I dwell on Sri Lanka a lot, and some people have asked me like, why do you do this? Because I think Sri Lankan experience really played the largest role in kind of influencing me, how I looked at the world and how I looked at politics. I was a teenager in Colombo in a predominantly Tamil neighborhood, Vellavatta, when my house was burned down during the 1983 riots. Then we moved to Jaffna. Initially, youngsters like us were very idealistic about reconstructing and recasting our Jaffna society, which is a traditional society, in a new mold. But by 1985, it became very clear that we had replaced one despotism with another. LTT, also known as the Tamil Tigers, revealed itself to be a ruthless and authoritarian entity. Many of my friends and professors and mentors and people whom I looked up to were murdered by the Tigers for disagreeing with them. Mind you, not for taking up arms, but for merely dissenting on and not accepting the authoritarian politics of Tigers. Many of us became, especially my generation, I feel sometimes I'm like the poster child of Sri Lankan conflict, because many of us became the victims of Sinhala nationalism on one hand and Tamil nationalism on the other, which led us to reject all sorts of nationalism and seek out a different path. And I think that's why my commitment is more for social justice, environmental justice, and fighting against discrimination than kind of following any sort of blind nationalism. Of course, I came to Boston, where I went to Wellesley College, and I was very active with the Amnesty International on human rights issues, campaigning for my fellow students who were illegally incarcerated by the LTT at that point. And then I came to Michigan, and I taught at Eastern Michigan University for 10 years, and I met a wide variety of students from different classes and ethnic groups, and my politics really grew here as well. And I guess the rest is history. Now I'm running for another city council.
Thank you, Mrs. Kailasapati. We wish you all the best. This concludes our news edition this week. We meet you next week with another news edition of News views and entertainment from Boston and USA. Till then, goodbye.